Hi, and welcome to the pre-show talk for Forward Theater's world premiere production of The Mytilenean Debate by Quanberry. I'm Karen Moeller, and I'm the Artistic Associate of Forward Theater Company. Now, The Mytilenean Debate is the third main stage show of our 13th season as a company and our 10th season as a resident company at Overture Center for the Arts. The show has a running time of 1 hour and 40 minutes and has no intermission. Now, I know that there are a lot of you watching this who have been to many Forward Theater shows, but there are probably some of you out there who haven't. And actually, since it's digital, there might be some of you out there who have never even been to Wisconsin. So for those of you who are not familiar with Forward Theater, I want to give you just in a nutshell a history of our company and tell you a bit about who we are. Forward Theater Company was founded in 2009 by professional actors, designers, playwrights, and directors in the Madison area. And our mission is to provide a home base for Wisconsin theater professionals and audiences that will expand the cultural and economic life of the greater Madison area. Now, the purpose of this pre-show talk is to provide you with some context to better appreciate our production of the Mytilenean Debate. We are thrilled to continue performing on stage at the Playhouse in front of a live audience. But for those of you who plan to watch a recording of the show at home instead, please know that what you'll be watching won't be like a movie. We videotaped a live performance with the deliberate goal of making you feel like you're sitting in the very best seat in the house, and we hope that you will feel transported to the theater as you watch it. For those of you watching this presentation who will then be seeing the show live and in person, we'll look forward to seeing you in the Playhouse. Now, I always like to start the pre-show talks talking about the playwrights, because without a playwright, we wouldn't have a play. And in this case, the playwright is someone very special who has a unique relationship to Forward Theater. The playwright of the Mytilenean Debate is Quanberry. Now, Amyquan Berry, she drops the Amy from her pen name. So if I call her Amy, don't get confused. Amyquan Berry was born in Saigon in the early 70s. She came to America a year later and grew up in Danvers, Massachusetts, on Boston's North Shore. A writer whose work encompasses multiple genres, from poetry to fiction to playwriting and beyond, Berry started writing at an early age. She says, "As a child, I created booklets in which I jotted poems and plays, but I had no concept of the different genres of creative writing. When I thought about being a writer, I didn't know people made distinctions. To me, it was just writing. And I still maintain that's what it means to be a writer." Berry was also drawn to literature, often reading books that her older siblings brought home from school, even though they were beyond her understanding at the time. Berry says, "When I first started to really read, I would read the high school books that my sisters were reading, even though I was only 8 or 9 years old. I remember reading The Crucible. I remember reading The Old Man and the Sea. Did I understand them? Probably not, but I have this memory of reading adult literature as a kid." As she entered her teens, Berry still enjoyed writing, but tended to do so only when fulfilling an assignment for class. She graduated from high school in 1990 and attended the University of Virginia, where her thoughts about writing shifted completely. She says, quote, "There were 2 girls in my suite who kept journals, and I would come home from class and see them out on the balcony furiously scribbling. Their diligence surprised me, mainly because I assumed writing was solely an academic exercise. After a while, I began to notice other people in the dorm who wrote poetry, and for some reason, I thought that just seemed really inordinately cool. The idea of writing just for yourself, not for a grade. And so I decided I would buy a journal and a pen and write thoughts at my leisure. I guess I got hooked." Thank goodness she did. After graduating with a BA in liberal arts, Berry went on to complete an MFA at the University of Michigan, where she was able to delve deeper into writing and poetry. In 2001, the first of her poetry collections, Asylum, was published, and she has since gone on to author 3 other poetry collections, Controvertibles, Water Puppets, and Loose Strife. Now, though her focus was on poetry for years, Berry never lost her belief that regardless of what genre you're working in, at the heart of it all, writing is just writing. She says, quote, "At the end of the day, I really believe in this idea of not making distinctions. because I think that when you make those distinctions, it can make it hard when you want to move into a different area. She proved this point in 2015 when she published her first work of fiction, She Weeps Each Time You're Born, and then again in 2020 with her novel We Ride Upon Sticks. We Ride Upon Sticks was listed in the Best Books of 2020 by NPR and as a must-read book of 2020 by Time magazine. It even got a mention from Oprah Winfrey in O Magazine, and that is super cool. Now, Amyquan Berry sometimes refers to herself as a self-taught author of fiction. She says, "It's funny, because when I first started writing fiction, I didn't think of myself as somebody who could come up with plots easily. I was primarily thinking of myself only as a poet and not just a writer. But the more I began to let go of that poet identity, the more I realized I do have a sense of how to write action. I do have a sense of how to do plot. It's just natural. I realized everything is a plot. Your whole life is a plot. I think when I loosened up my expectations about where the plot was supposed to come from and how I was supposed to come up with it, it just made everything easier. I think so much of writing really is intuitive. We tell stories all the time about our lives." So by now, I think you've caught on to the fact that Amyquan Berry is not a writer who limits herself. Remember when I said she used to write poems and plays as a child? She never gave up writing poetry, and luckily for us, she also didn't stop writing plays. She says, "Some years ago, I wrote a couple of plays. At the time, I didn't know what one does with them. I didn't know how the theater world worked. One of those plays was a script called the Mytilenean Debate. I've been a fan of Forward Theater here in Madison for a long time, and I noticed they had a playwriting contest called Wisconsin Writes. So I submitted it, and it was chosen to receive a staged reading in the Wisconsin Writes Festival. Now, that reading made it very clear that Berry was a talented new voice in theater, and we at Forward immediately started thinking about giving the Mytilenean Debate a home on our main stage and of ways that we could develop a deeper partnership with this new playwright. In the spring of 2021, Forward announced that we would be producing the Mytilenean Debate in our upcoming 13th season, and we were delighted that we weren't the only ones who wanted to expand the relationship. Berry expressed the desire to become more immersed in the world of theater herself, and as such, she was named Forward Theater's first writer-in-residence. According to Berry, right now when it comes to playwriting, I think the way I used to think about fiction. I feel like I'm learning this all over again, how to write in a different genre. Now, through her experiences on the Forward Theater Advisory Company, her behind-the-scenes access to our first 2 productions of this season, and her involvement in the production of her own play, she's learned what a complex collaborative process theater is. In a recent interview with the Wisconsin State Journal, she said, "It's such an interesting world for me, because as a poet and as a fiction writer, I write something and I send it to my editor. Usually, it's just a conversation between the two of us. My editor has tweaks or suggestions, and then it moves forward. In the playwriting world, there's a lot more cooks involved, which is a good thing. It can be a strength of the theater. You have more eyeballs on it, more ears listening, and more suggestions coming in." Berry says that she's discovered a new kind of freedom in writing plays. She also recognizes that there are voices in the theater that haven't been heard very much. She says, quote, "I'm interested in writing plays with characters of color. I'm interested in seeing characters on the stage who maybe we haven't seen that much. In the Mytilenean Debate, these are upper-class Black folks. Not that they haven't existed on the stage before, but I'm really interested in thinking about them in particular." Now, even as a child, Berry had noticed the lack of characters in books or plays who looked like her. She says, "In elementary school, there used to be book sales. My brother and I are both adopted, and we were basically the only children of color in the school. There were maybe 5 of us at a school of 200 or 300 students. And I remember our librarian saying to me at one of those book sales, 'Oh, here's a book that I think you'd like.' It was about an African-American girl living in the South, about her adventures and what she was up to. I still remember that book because I don't have memories of seeing many African-American characters elsewhere." In an interview with Gavin Lawrence for the podcast In the Wake of Our Shadow, Black Voices, Berry expanded upon this point. She said, quote, I don't think as a child I recognized that there were holes in literature that I could fill. It was when I went to college in the South that I started to realize that there were holes. I mean, there were Black poets and Black writers, but not that many. And I began to think that there should be work written by someone like me, and that I would be interested in what kinds of things someone like me would write. A lot of my career has been about identifying holes I can fill. I mean, I don't think I've consciously thought, I see these holes and I'm going to write into them, but I've definitely recognized that there are certain voices that aren't out there. Now, Berry has lived in Wisconsin for 20 years now. Her mother grew up in the state, and she recalls many summers visiting her grandparents in Door County. She is the Lorraine Hansberry Professor of English at UW-Madison, where she has directed both the MFA program in creative writing and the Wisconsin Institute of Creative Writing. She says, quote, "More and more, I find myself drawn to teaching. I see the role I play in my students' creative lives in helping them have full, well-rounded undergraduate experiences, and I realize in some ways what an honor it is to be so important to these kids in this way." She is one of a select group of writers to receive NEA fellowships in both poetry and fiction. In 2021, she was awarded the American Library Association's Alex Award, and her work has appeared in esteemed publications such as the Kenyon Review, Plowshares, the Missouri Review, and the New Yorker. And in case poetry, fiction, and playwriting aren't enough, she has also recently finished a screenplay. Oh, and her third fiction novel, When I'm Gone, Look for Me in the East, was just published on February 22nd of this year and is already receiving great reviews, including one from the New York Times, which is very impressive and very cool. So now I know that there are some of you out there who like to go into a play not knowing anything about it, but there are also some of you out there who are like me. I like to know a little bit about the play because otherwise I always feel like I'm playing catch-up for about the first 10 or 15 minutes. So I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of the play. I promise there will not be spoilers. And if you are one of those people who doesn't want to hear a synopsis, I would say just forward this video about, 1 or 2 minutes and you won't have to hear any of it. But for those of you who want to hear a synopsis, here we go. The Mytilenean debate takes place in New York City in the aftermath of 9/11. The play centers on the characters of heart surgeon Latimer Ames and his younger girlfriend Nina, his adult daughter Mary, and her newlywed husband Charles. The play consists primarily of two-person scenes interspersed with the occasional monologue. At the outset, Nina and Latimer are talking to a counselor, attempting to deconstruct the roadblocks they have each brought to their relationship. Latimer is a renowned heart surgeon whose success masks his ongoing efforts to stay one step ahead of the nightmares and struggles of his past. Nina, a television producer, seems comfortable with her life choices and where her past has led her, but a life-changing piece of news forces her to re-examine everything and to make one of the biggest decisions of her life. Mary and Charles, meanwhile, are attempting to start a family, but fertility issues and conflicting life goals repeatedly push them apart, exposing the struggles they both have with the issues of their own identities and race. At various points in the play, each of the characters grapple with the questions of legacy, family, inheritance, and obligation, while facing the consequences of their own and each other's decisions. Now, I bet there are a few of you who might not know what the title of the play refers to. I didn't, but I'm going to tell you because it's a really interesting story. The play's title refers to an event that took place early in the 5th century BCE during the Peloponnesian War. So Athens decided to teach the recently vanquished city-state of Mytilene a lesson by killing all Mytilenean men and selling all Mytilenean women and children into slavery. A galley was dispatched across the Aegean Sea to deliver the news and execute the order. The next day, the Athenians had second thoughts. Following a tumultuous debate, they changed their mind. A second, double-manned galley rowed furiously to overtake the first. It arrived in Mytilene just in time to prevent a mass execution. Now, Forward Theater Advisory Company member Mike Fisher, in his excellent program notes, states that, quote, "Like those long-ago Athenians, All 4 of Berry's characters, 3 black and 1 white, are debating with themselves and each other regarding the choices they've made and how it's shaped who they've become. And none of those decisions are made easier by expectations, often imposed, regarding who we should be. The Mytilenean debate explores how such expectations define us and restrict our choices, making it hard to think anew on issues including parenting and adoption, gender, the intersection of race and class, what it means to grow old, how hard it is to be young, and whether it's possible to remake the past. Now, the Mytilenean debate isn't the first time that Berry has used a piece of classical history to inform her work. She even refers to herself as an amateur classicist. In that same podcast interview with Gavin Lawrence, Berry said, "As a child, my mother made us take Latin. I took a lot of Latin growing up. And as an adult, I decided to take ancient Greek, though I only managed a year. I've always been interested in these stories." Her 2015 poetry collection, titled Loose Strife, was initially inspired by Aeschylus's 5th century BC trilogy, the Oresteia, which chronicles the fall of the house of Atreides. When asked what drew her to this classical story, Berry said, "I enjoy ruminating over big questions, such as, what is it about ruins that are powerful to us?" There are ruins in the Mytilenean debate, too. In this case, it's the ruins of the Twin Towers that fell in the attacks of 9/11. Part of the reason Berry chose to set her play at this time is because, as the play's director, Mark H., says, this intimate family drama is incited in many ways by this larger societal event. These characters are in a world they no longer recognize. Or as the character of Mary puts it in the play, everything's shifted, like people's priorities. Everyone's recalibrating. It's this recalibration that forces each of the characters to see their lives, themselves, and each other in a different light. The effects of 9/11 affect the play in another way. Mary and Charles are trying to start a family, but they've been unable to conceive. When the couple starts to talk about adopting, Mary believes that more people will be starting families because of the tragedy of 9/11. As she says, "We're probably not the only ones who want to start a family now. People want to feel hopeful again." She worries that their chances might be hurt by the increased demand for adoptable babies. But did that actually happen? There's no ready data on adoption rates after September 11th, 2001, but research has been done about the effect of 9/11 on birth rates in the New York area. 9 months after the terrorist attacks, the New York Times printed a story questioning whether an increase of births related to the event was likely to occur. Now, the idea that catastrophic events may elicit a baby boom does have precedence in the media. Following a New York City blackout in 1965, the New York Times reported anecdotal evidence that births had increased, and the thought that significant events could trigger a fertility response remains implanted in the collective consciousness. The World Trade Center bombing, which resulted in huge loss of life and immense national grief, was expected to arouse such a response. A research study by the University of Pennsylvania shows that a sizable surge in births did indeed occur in New York County and especially in Manhattan in 2003, which is the first full year in which the effects of the bombing might be predicted to appear, which means that Mary's suspicion that more people want to start families seems to have been absolutely correct. Well, I've talked a lot about the author of the show, about the themes contained within it, and the history of the production. I want to switch focus now to the actual production that you're going to be seeing. A lot of people went into the making of it, and I want to try and shine a light on each of them. First of all, I want to talk about our director, Mark H. Now, Mark H. directed the staged reading of the Mytilenean debate in 2020 for the Wisconsin Rights Festival, and he's also the director of Forward Theater's world premiere production. A native of Washington, D.C., Mark is a director, performer, and educator with a primary focus on American theater and theater of the African diaspora. He's a graduate of the MFA directing program at Columbia University School of the Arts and is an assistant professor of theater at UW-Madison. Now, when he was asked what drew him to the play, Mark said this: "America has a very strong tradition of family dramas in theater, such as plays by Eugene O'Neill or August Wilson. So Amy joins in that tradition with this piece. But also, it's the form that she's playing with that makes the Mytilenean debate so intriguing. There's an interwoven, very fluid feel to the piece. I feel that's what makes it really beautiful, really unique. I've had the actors think about the play itself as a piece of music, as if it were a big musical score with various movements and shifts. Keith Pitts has designed the sets for several forward shows, including Fun Home, Mr. Burns, and Good People. He had this to say about how the scenic design for the Mytilenean debate was created. Quote, "When I first read the script, I felt that it was a dramatic and very serious environment. And with the information that it was set shortly after 9/11, I started looking at images from the 9/11 memorial for inspiration. I had this strong image of these two squares in the same space, a reflection of the two bases of the towers. And then I discovered an image of the slurry wall, the wall that held back the Hudson River and was the only thing protecting Ground Zero from flooding during the recovery. And I thought that had such a strong dynamic feeling to it. I wanted it to feel like the weight of everything was at any moment going to collapse in the playing area to give a bit of tension. Then, as I had more conversations with Mark, he wanted to make the space look a little more collapsed, more like the actual Ground Zero. We talked about making it look like a broken slab. I put in the I-beams and wanted to really work on this clutter and reflect that gray dust that you would see in those amazing pictures of 9/11, where people were covered in that dust. And when you look at them in those photos, it's as if they almost lost their identity in that moment. They became one human unit. And so I wanted to use those elements to build the space, not trying to actually be any of those places or things, but trying to reflect and create that environment for the actors to tell the story in. Greg Hofmann is an amazing lighting designer, and we at Forward Theater know it. He has designed the lighting for many of our shows, including Lewiston Clarkston, Outside Mullingar, Mr. Burns, Silent Sky, and 44 Plays for 44 Presidents. His lighting for the Mytilenean debate expertly threads the needle between evoking Ground Zero and also creating the lighting for scenes played out in everyday locales, from a kitchen to a therapist's office. Jazmin Aurora Medina designed the costumes for the Mytilenean debate. This is her second show with Forward Theater, after designing costumes for the Niceties last season. When Jazmin first started thinking about the design for this show, she pictured the draped designs of classical Greek clothing, and then found ways to make that work in a modern way. She says, "I think the biggest thing for this show was keeping fluidity and layering married together, and helping to enhance the actors in the moments they need it most. The one thing that's remained consistent is the use of texture, and playing against the opposites of all four characters to really allow the different parts of their personalities to speak through their costumes. So while all four of them still have their own individual styles, they are married together through the cohesive color palette and the similar sweater textures and softness they all have at the inner layer." Pam Miles has been designing props and set dressing for Forward Theater for over 7 seasons, and painting. And once again, she has brought her incredible talented skill to help create the fabulous stage picture you'll see for the show. It's really quite striking. I think it will take your breath away when you first walk in the theater. Joe Cerqua has designed the sound and music for almost every Forward play. And given that the character of Charles is a jazz musician, it's not surprising to learn you'll be hearing a lot of jazz in the sound design. According to Joe, it's all straight out jazz. Some of it's very busy and very dark, and it was very fun to write. I was listening to a lot of Love Supreme for inspiration, and I think you'll hear that in what the musicians did with it. Now, the instrumentation is comprised of tenor sax, soprano sax, bass, piano, and drums. And while Joe describes the opening cue as very much inspired by 9/11, he says that it's even more inspired by the relationships in the show, particularly the dynamic of race inside a mixed-race relationship. Now, once again, we are presenting an immensely talented cast on our stage. The first cast member is Olivia Dawson, and she marks her return to the Forward stage after several years. Olivia appeared in our production of Going to St. Ives, and she plays Nina in the Mytilenean debate. Gavin Lawrence is known to many of you for his work at American Players Theater in Spring Green. This is Gavin's first show with Forward Theater, and he'll be portraying Latimer. Samra Teferra played Mary in the staged reading of the Mytilenean debate, and Gavin and Olivia were also in that reading. And Samra is making her main stage debut with Forward in the same role. Marcus Truschinski appeared in Forward's productions of Mr. Burns and Sons of the Prophet, and he is playing the role of Charles. Now, finally, I want to conclude by saying this isn't the end of the conversation. I hope you'll continue the conversation with us. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. Social media, all the various social medias, follow us there. Please, if you're going to see the show in person, do consider staying afterwards and attending the talk back. Those are always fantastic. And of course, you can speak with members of the company in the lobby. At every performance, there will be people with Forward Theater name tags on, and they are happy to answer your questions, to talk with you more about Forward Theater, about the show, about everything. Listen to our podcast. There are always great interviews on that. And speaking of podcasts, on Saturday, March 5th, and for those of you who might be seeing this after the fact, I apologize. On Saturday, March 5th at 4 p.m., there will be a live recording of American Theater Magazine's podcast, The Subtext, from Inside the Playhouse. It's hosted by Brian James Pollock, and he'll be conducting an in-depth conversation with Amyquan Berry about playwriting. That event is free, it's open to the public, and more information can be found at the Forward Theater website. Oh, and as I mentioned earlier, Amy's latest book, When I'm Gone, Look for Me in the East, was just published on February 22nd. Time magazine called it one of the most anticipated books of 2022, and as I mentioned earlier, it just got a rave review in the New York Times. And thanks to local Madison bookstore It's a Mystery to Me, copies of that book are available for sale in the lobby, as well as, online at bookstores near you. Check it out, get a copy. Finally, tickets are now on sale for Forward Theater's annual game night, featuring bingo called by Forward personality and fabulous prizes from dozens of local businesses. It's happening on Sunday, March 27th from 5 to 8 p.m. at the Goodman Center, and you can get more details and purchase your tickets at our website. It's going to be a lot of fun. It is always a lot of fun, and we hope to see you all there. Finally, thank you. Thank you for joining me in this talk. Thank you for supporting local professional theater. Thank you for being fans of Forward, for being fans of Amyquan Berry, and for coming to see the show, and for taking the time to watch this pre-show talk. Thank you, and enjoy the show.